In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But beneath the thunder of battle and the glory of the Space Marines lies something far more disturbing. Something that exists in every corner of the Imperium, on every world, in every ship, in every factory and fortress. They shuffle through dimly lit corridors, their movements stiff and mechanical. They toil in manufactorums where the air burns the lungs and the noise shatters the mind. They stand guard in silence, their weapons humming with barely contained violence. They are everywhere, and they are nowhere. They are servitors, and their existence represents one of the most profound horrors of the Imperium of man. To understand the servitor is to understand the true cost of humanity's survival in the 41st millennium. These creatures, if we can still call them that, occupy a space between the living and the machine. They are the compromise that allows the Imperium to function without the artificial intelligence it fears more than almost any other threat in the galaxy. They are the price paid for technological advancement in a civilization that has banned true machine intelligence. And they are, perhaps more than any other single element of the Imperium, a window into just how far humanity has fallen from its ancient heights. This is not a story of heroes. There is no glory here, no noble sacrifice willingly made. This is a story of transformation, of identity destroyed, of consciousness trapped in a prison of flesh and steel. This is the story of what happens when the Imperium of man needs a tool but refuses to build a thinking machine. This is the horrifying life of a servitor in Warhammer 40k. What is a servitor? A servitor is, in the most clinical terms, a cybernetic drone. It is created from a fusion of human flesh and robotic technology, designed to carry out simple, manual tasks across the vast Imperium of man. But this sterile definition conceals a darker truth. A servitor is not built from scratch like a machine. It is not constructed on an assembly line with synthetic materials and circuitry alone. No, a servitor begins as something else. It begins as human. The Adeptus Mechanicus, the tech priests who control all advanced technology in the Imperium, create servitors on their forge worlds. These constructs are then supplied to every branch of Imperial authority you can imagine. The Administratum uses them to process the endless streams of data that flow through the bureaucracy. The Inquisition employs them for tasks too dangerous or too menial for human servants. The Astra Militarum, the vast armies of the Imperial Guard, relies on them for logistics and maintenance. Even the mighty Space Marines utilize servitors in their fortress monasteries and aboard their battle barges. On the forge worlds themselves, servitors make up the vast bulk of the population. On Mars, the red planet that serves as the heart of the Adeptus Mechanicus, servitors number in the tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions. They are the tireless workers who keep the forges burning, the assembly lines moving, the great machinery of production grinding forward without pause. Why do servitors exist at all? The answer lies in one of the Imperium's deepest fears and most absolute prohibitions. The cult Mechanicus, the religion of the Adeptus Mechanicus, utterly forbids the creation of true artificial intelligence. They call such forbidden creations silica animus, or abominable intelligence, and they consider them to be blasphemy against the machine god, the Omnissiah. This fear is not without foundation. During the Dark Age of technology, humanity's golden age, tens of thousands of years before the current era, humans created thinking machines of tremendous sophistication. These artificial intelligences eventually turned against their creators in what is remembered as the Machine Rebellion, a catastrophe that contributed to humanity's fall from its technological heights. The prohibition against artificial intelligence left the Imperium with a problem. Advanced technology requires some form of intelligence to operate, maintain, and control it. Simple machines can only go so far. Complex systems need direction, adaptation, decision-making, even if only at a basic level. But if you cannot build a thinking machine, what alternative remains? The answer the Adeptus Mechanicus found was as practical as it was horrifying. They would use organic brains, human brains, but strip away everything that made them human. They would lobotomize, reprogram, and cybernetically enhance human beings to create biological computers, living tools that could perform the functions of artificial intelligence without technically violating the prohibition against machine minds. This is the Servitor, a compromise between necessity and prohibition, a solution that satisfies the letter of the law while violating every principle of human dignity, a being that possesses, somewhere deep within its altered brain, the ghost of a person who once existed but who has been systematically destroyed to serve the Imperium's needs. The servitors you see standing in the corners of an inquisitor's chambers, or shuffling through the corridors of a space marine fortress, or working ceaselessly in the manufactorums of a hive city, all share this common origin, whether they were grown in vats from carefully controlled genetic material, or whether they were once full human beings with lives and hopes and fears. They have all been reduced to the same state. They are tools, they are property, they are the living dead, if such a term can even apply to something that exists in such a liminal state between biological life and mechanical function. And they are everywhere, in a galaxy of 1,000,000 worlds, on countless ships traversing the void, in every installation of any significance. Servitors labor without rest, without complaint, without consciousness of the horror of their existence. They are so common that most citizens of the Imperium barely notice them. They are furniture, background noise, unremarkable as the walls themselves. Only outsiders, or those rare individuals with enough perspective to see the truth, recognize servitors for what they truly are. Evidence of how far the Imperium of man will go, how much of humanity itself it will sacrifice to maintain its grip on existence in a hostile galaxy. The origins. How servitors are created. The creation of a servitor is not a single process, but rather a range of procedures, each with its own methods and each producing different results. At one end of the spectrum are the vat-grown servitors, created from genetic material in the controlled environments of the Adeptus Mechanicus's biological laboratories. At the other end are the converted human beings who were once as alive and aware as anyone, transformed into servitors through a process that can only be described as the deliberate destruction of personhood. The vat-grown servitors begin as clones, engineered from human genetic templates, but never intended to develop full consciousness or autonomy. They are grown in amniotic tanks, their development carefully controlled and monitored by the biologist division of the Adeptus Mechanicus. These clones are genetically modified to be subhuman, their brains structured from the beginning to be receptive to programming rather than capable of independent thought. In many ways, these vat-grown servitors are the least troubling variety, if such a word can be used in this context. They never possessed full human consciousness, never had lives or identities that were taken from them. They are born as tools and know nothing else. But vat-grown servitors, while common, are not the only source. In fact, they may not even be the majority. The Imperium produces criminals at a staggering rate. In a civilization of 1,000,000 worlds where the laws are Byzantine, contradictory, and often impossible to follow without violating some other regulation, where faith in the wrong aspect of the Emperor's divinity can be heresy, where failure to meet production quotas can be treason, where simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time can mark you as suspect, the number of people sentenced to death is beyond calculation. The Imperium does not waste resources. Those condemned to die are given a different sentence instead: Servitude Imperpituis, eternal service. The process of converting a human being into a servitor begins with capture and transport. The condemned are rounded up by the Adeptus Arbites, the Imperium's brutal law enforcement, or by local authorities who deliver them to collection points. They are shipped to Forge Worlds or to the tech priests attached to various Imperial institutions, packed into cargo holds like any other raw material. For many, This journey is the last time they will be conscious of themselves as individuals, the last moments in which they can think, fear, hope, or regret. Or, upon arrival, the transformation begins. The process varies depending on the requirements of the final product and the practices of the particular forge world or tech priest conducting the procedure, but certain elements are nearly universal. First comes the physical preparation. The subject's hair is removed, not just shaved, but the follicles themselves destroyed through chemical or thermal treatment, eliminating any future need for grooming. The body is often stripped, cleaned, and catalogued. Identification numbers are branded or tattooed onto the flesh, marking this person as property, as inventory. Then comes the lobotomy. This is not the relatively precise procedure of ancient terror, where specific brain functions were targeted while leaving others intact. No, the imperial lobotomy is a crude and brutal affair. In some cases, holes are drilled directly into the skull and instruments inserted to physically destroy portions of the brain. In others, the skull is opened wide and sections of brain tissue are simply cut away. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of higher reasoning and personality, is deliberately damaged or removed. The portions of the brain responsible for memory, emotion, and self-awareness are scrambled beyond recovery. What remains is a biological computer capable of processing inputs and executing simple programs, but incapable of anything that might be called thought in the human sense. Notably, in many cases, this lobotomy is performed last in the sequence of modifications, or with only minimal anesthesia. This is not accidental. The Imperium believes in punishment that purifies through suffering. The condemned are meant to feel their transformation, to experience the horror of what is being done to them, in the hope that this agony will cleanse their souls of sin before their minds are destroyed. It is a theology of cruelty dressed in the language of redemption. With the brain appropriately damaged and prepared, the cybernetic augmentations begin. This is where the servitor truly takes shape. The specific modifications depend entirely on the servitor's intended function. A servitor designed for heavy lifting will have its arms replaced with pneumatic claws or magnetic grapples, powerful enough to move tons of weight, but utterly useless for any delicate task. A servitor, meant to serve as a living weapons platform, will have entire limbs amputated and replaced with weapons mounts, heavy bolters, or plasma cannons, grafted directly to the shoulders or torso. A servitor intended for data processing might retain more of its original body, but will have cogitator implants wired directly into what remains of its brain, turning its organic neural tissue into merely one component of a hybrid biological computer. The modifications are not limited to the exterior. Internal organs may be removed and replaced with more efficient or durable mechanical equivalents. Nutrient processing systems are implanted, allowing the servitor to function on minimal sustenance or even on direct energy input. Waste elimination systems are either rerouted or eliminated entirely. The body's biological processes redesigned for maximum efficiency and minimum maintenance. Pain receptors are often left intact or even enhanced, not out of cruelty, although there is certainly that element, but because pain serves as a useful feedback mechanism, alerting handlers when a servitor has sustained damage that requires repair. The neural programming comes last. Electrodes are inserted deep into what remains of the brain, and patterns are burned directly into the neural tissue. These patterns constitute the servitor's programming, the basic instructions that will govern its behavior. A servitor might be programmed to recognize certain types of equipment and perform maintenance on them. Another might be programmed to follow specific individuals and carry objects for them. A third might be programmed to fire its weapons at anything its controller designates as a target. The programming is crude but generally effective. It reduces human behavior to stimulus and response, turning the complexity of consciousness into simple binary decisions. Throughout this entire process, from capture to final programming, the person who existed before is systematically erased. Their memories, their personality, their sense of self, everything that made them an individual is destroyed. What emerges from the biologist workshops of the Adeptus Mechanicus is something else entirely. It has a human brain, or at least part of one. It has human tissue, at least in some portions of its body. But it is no longer human in any meaningful sense. It is a servitor, a tool, a piece of equipment with a human component. The Adeptus Mechanicus creates millions of servitors every year. On a single forge world, the servitor population can number in the tens of millions. They are created in massive facilities where the conversion process runs continuously, an assembly line of dehumanization that never stops. Human beings enter one end of the process, and servitors emerge from the other, their transformation complete, ready to be shipped to wherever the Imperium needs them. It is industrialized horror on a scale that defies comprehension, and it happens every single day throughout the Imperium, accepted and unremarked as simply the way things are done. Types of servitors. The Imperium's needs are vast and varied, and so too are the types of servitors created to meet those needs. Each variety is specialized, designed and programmed for specific tasks, their bodies modified to suit their functions. Understanding the different types of servitors is to understand the breadth of horror, the countless ways in which human beings are transformed into tools. The most common varieties are the basic labor servitors, often called Technomats, Holomats, Lexomats, or simply drones, depending on their specific function. Technomats are programmed to operate and maintain machinery. They shuffle through factory floors and engine rooms, their augmetic limbs equipped with tools and sensors, performing the endless routine maintenance that keeps Imperial technology functioning. A Technomat might spend centuries doing nothing but tightening the same bolts on the same machines, over and over, its damaged brain incapable of boredom or despair at the monotony of its existence. Holomats serve as recording devices, their brains wired to holocapture equipment, essentially turning them into living cameras and storage media. They follow officials and priests, recording everything they see and hear, their modified neural tissue storing data like an organic computer drive. The thought that somewhere within that servitor's brain might exist fragments of memory of a life before, now inextricably mixed with the data they have been forced to record, is disturbing beyond measure. Lexomats are perhaps the most complex of the basic servitor types. They serve as semi-organic computers, their brains enhanced with cogitator implants and programmed for tremendous calculating power. A Lexomat can process numerical data, sort records, perform mathematical operations with speed and accuracy far beyond unaugmented humans. They are used extensively in the administratum, the vast bureaucracy that manages the Imperium, standing motionless for hours while data streams through their augmented brains, occasionally outputting results through vocoder units that have replaced their natural speech organs. Drones are the simplest variety, barely more than biological robots. Their brains are damaged most severely, leaving only the most basic motor functions and the ability to follow simple commands. Drones are used for menial labor of all kinds, from hauling cargo to cleaning to standing guard over equipment. They require constant supervision because their programming is so limited that without direction, they will simply stand in place, waiting for orders that may never come, until their bodies fail from neglect. Construction servitors are more heavily modified, their bodies rebuilt for hard labor in hostile environments. They might have 4 arms instead of 2, all replaced with industrial tools like drills, saws, or rivet guns. Their legs might be replaced with treads or heavy-duty pneumatic supports capable of bearing immense loads. Their flesh is often supplemented with heavy armor plating, not for protection in battle, but simply because the environments they work in, deep mines, toxic refineries, the void of space itself, would destroy unprotected human tissue. These servitors toil in conditions that would kill a normal human within minutes, their enhanced bodies enduring where flesh alone would fail. Gun servitors represent a more militarized variant. These are servitors who have been converted into weapons platforms, mobile artillery pieces with a biological component. A typical gun servitor will have at least one limb replaced with a heavy weapon, anything from a heavy bolter to a multi-melter to a plasma cannon. They might also have enhanced targeting systems wired directly into their optical nerves, turning their eyes into living targeting computers. Ammunition hoppers and power cells are mounted on their bodies, and their skeletal structure is reinforced to handle the recoil and weight of the weapons they carry. Gun servitors are deployed alongside Imperial forces, particularly with the Adeptus Mechanicus's own troops and with tech priests attached to other military formations. They provide fire support, standing motionless until commanded to fire, then unleashing devastating barrages until their weapons overheat or their ammunition is exhausted. Battle servitors are a broader category that includes gun servitors, but also extends to close combat variants. These might be equipped with power fists, chainsaws, or other melee weapons in place of hands. Their muscles are often enhanced with vat-grown tissue or hydraulic augmentation, giving them strength far beyond normal humans. Some battle servitors are equipped with multiple arms, turning them into whirling engines of destruction in close quarters. They are deployed in boarding actions, in the confined corridors of ships and hive cities where their brutal efficiency in melee combat is most valuable. Praetorian Servitors represent the upper end of battle servitor creation, and they are genuinely terrifying constructs. These are not made from normal humans, but from ogrins, the massive, powerful, but dim-witted abhumans who sometimes serve in the Imperial Guard. An ogrin stands perhaps 9 or 10 feet tall and possesses strength far exceeding normal human limits. When converted into a servitor, this physical power is enhanced further with augmetic muscles and heavy armor plating. Praetorian Servitors are mobile fortresses, towering over even space marines, armed with heavy weapons and often mounted on tracks or articulated legs to support their immense weight. They serve as guardians for important installations, particularly Mechanicus temples and shrines. Their mere presence is often enough to deter attack. The sight of these massive war machines enough to convince potential troublemakers to look elsewhere for targets. The Kataphron Battle Servitors represent perhaps the apex of the art, if such a word can be used, of servitor creation. These are heavy combat servitors used by the Adeptus Mechanicus for serious warfare. A Kataphron Breacher or Kataphron Destroyer is massive, far larger than a normal human, because the human components have been extensively supplemented with machinery. The process of creating a Kataphron begins with selecting individuals noted for physical size and aggression. Criminals from hive gangs, renegade enforcers, anyone with the right physical profile and violent tendencies. They are chemically lobotomized, their personalities and memories theoretically wiped clean, though as we will discuss later, the process is not always complete. The body is then cut in half at the abdomen. The lower half is discarded entirely, and the upper torso is mounted on a tracked or repulsor drive unit. Arms are replaced with weapons or industrial tools, depending on whether the servitor is being configured as a breacher or destroyer variant. Heavy armor plating is bolted directly to the skeleton. Targeting cogitators are wired into the brain. Chemical injectors are implanted along the spine, similar to but less extreme than those used in Arco-Flagellants. The entire construct weighs hundreds of pounds, a tank in the shape of a half-human. Kataphron servitors are built by the thousands. Every forge world maintains vast biohangars, where ranks of dormant Kataphrons stand waiting for activation, their systems on standby, row after row of these half-machine war constructs ready to be awakened when needed. When battle comes, they are activated en masse, their rudimentary combat programming engaging as they rumble forward, firing their heavy weapons with no concern for their own survival. They are used callously, expended like ammunition, because servitors, even ones as complex and expensive as Kataphrons, are ultimately disposable. A tech priest will sacrifice dozens of them without a second thought if it accomplishes the tactical objective. Their mangled remains are simply recycled, the metal salvaged, the organic components disposed of, the whole operation as coldly efficient as everything else in the Imperium. There are more exotic varieties still. Servoraptors, created from large predatory birds with cybernetic enhancements, used for aerial reconnaissance. Cyber eagles, similar but more heavily augmented. Even servitors created from Xenos creatures, though such creations are technically heretical and only undertaken by the most radical magi. The variety is nearly endless, limited only by the imagination of the tech priest doing the creating and the available biological material. But common to all of them is the fundamental transformation. A living being is taken and reduced to a tool. Its consciousness is destroyed or suppressed. Its body is rebuilt according to function rather than form. Its entire existence is redefined as servitude, and not the servitude of the slave who retains awareness of their bondage and might dream of freedom, but the servitude of the thing that no longer possesses the capacity to understand what has been taken from it. This is the true horror of the servitor. Not that they suffer, though many do, but that they have been robbed of the very ability to comprehend their own condition. They are the ultimate expression of the Imperium's utilitarian cruelty, beings denied even the dignity of knowing what they have lost. Daily existence on Forge Worlds. To truly understand what it means to be a servitor, we must examine their existence in the places where they are most concentrated. The Forge Worlds of the Adeptus Mechanicus. These worlds, with Mars as the most prominent example, are entirely devoted to production. Their surfaces are covered with factory complexes that stretch from horizon to horizon, massive structures that dwarf the greatest hive cities, reaching miles into the toxic atmospheres and extending deep into the planetary crusts. The population of a Forge world is measured in the hundreds of millions, sometimes billions. Of these, the vast majority are servitors. On Mars itself, estimates suggest that servitors may outnumber living, conscious humans by ratios of hundreds or thousands to one. They are the true workforce of the Forge worlds, the tireless laborers who keep the forges burning and the production lines moving without pause. A servitor on a Forge world never stops working. Unlike human workers who require rest, food, sleep, and time off, a servitor can function continuously as long as its mechanical systems are maintained and its biological components are provided with minimal sustenance. The nutrient systems implanted in most servitors require feeding only once every several days. Simple nutritional paste, or even direct chemical infusions that keep the organic tissues alive without the complex process of eating. Some advanced servitors can function for weeks on internal reserves alone. The work itself is endless and varied. In the vast manufactorums, servitors operate the machines that produce everything the Imperium needs. They feed raw materials into processors, monitor assembly lines, perform quality control checks following pre-programmed parameters, and package finished products for shipment. In the forges where weapons and armor are created, servitors work amid heat that would cook unprotected flesh, their bodies shielded by crude environmental seals and heat-resistant plating. In the refineries that process the toxic ores and chemical compounds necessary for advanced manufacturing, servitors labor in atmospheres that would kill a human in seconds. Their respiratory systems modified or replaced entirely with rebreathers and chemical filters. The noise level in these facilities is beyond imagining. The constant thunder of machinery, the hiss of hydraulics, the shriek of metal on metal, the roar of furnaces, all of it blending into a cacophony that would drive an unprotected human insane within hours. But servitors, their hearing often damaged during creation, or their auditory processing centers reprogrammed to filter out everything except specific command frequencies, work through the noise as if it doesn't exist. Similarly, the temperatures fluctuate wildly, from the searing heat of the forges to the bitter cold of cryogenic storage facilities. but servitors simply endure, their modified bodies too damaged or altered to process discomfort in any meaningful way. The visual landscape of a Forge world's industrial sectors would be nightmarish to anyone not native to such an environment. The light is strange, filtered through polluted atmospheres and colored by the glow of countless chemical processes. Shadows dance and shift as massive machines move through their cycles. Rivers of molten metal flow through channels in the floor. Toxic fumes drift in clouds through the air, tinting everything in sickly yellows and greens. And through all of this, servitors shuffle and trudge, their movements mechanical and precise, carrying out their programmed tasks with the same unchanging efficiency, whether they have been active for hours or years. There is no such thing as a shift change for a servitor. Human workers on a Forge world, the tech priests and their attendants, the skilled laborers who have not yet been converted, they work in shifts, brutal shifts often lasting 20 hours or more, but shifts nonetheless, with periods of rest and recovery. Servitors do not rest. When their tasks are complete, they do not retire to barracks or homes. Instead, they move to standby stations, alcoves built into the walls of the facilities, where they lock into charging stations. Here they stand, motionless, their systems cycling down to minimal power consumption, their brains entering a state that might be called sleep, except that sleep implies rest and dreams. And servitors do not dream. They simply wait, their consciousness, such as it is, suspended in a grey void, until they are needed again. Maintenance is performed on servitors with the same casual efficiency as it would be on any other piece of equipment. Damaged servitors are brought to repair bays where tech priests or maintenance servitors examine them, replace broken components, and reprogram as necessary. If the damage is too extensive, if the biological components are too degraded, the servitor is simply decommissioned. The useful parts are salvaged, the rest is disposed of, and a new servitor is issued to replace it. The entire process is logged and tracked with the same attention to detail that would be devoted to any inventory management system, because that is exactly what it is. Servitors are inventory, assets to be tracked, maintained, and replaced as needed. The sheer scale of this system is difficult to comprehend. On Mars alone, the servitor population might number in the hundreds of millions. Every single day, thousands of new servitors are created, replacing those that have failed or adding to the workforce as production demands increase. Every single day, those servitors perform trillions of individual tasks, each one a small component of the vast industrial machine that keeps the Imperium supplied with the tools of war and the necessities of civilization. And every single one of those servitors was created from material that was human. The efficiency is undeniable. A single servitor, because it requires no rest, minimal sustenance, and no consideration for working conditions, can perform the work of 20 unaugmented humans. This is why the Adeptus Mechanicus prefers servitors to human workers. This is why other imperial organizations request them in vast numbers. They are simply more efficient. From a purely utilitarian perspective, converting criminals and undesirables into servitors is a rational allocation of resources. It removes individuals who have proven themselves problematic from society, while simultaneously creating valuable assets. But this efficiency comes at a cost that the Imperium, in its grim practicality, has decided is acceptable. The cost is measured not in resources or currency, but in something far more fundamental: humanity itself. Every servitor represents a person whose individuality has been destroyed, whose potential has been reduced to a single function, whose existence has been redefined as nothing more than a tool in service of the Imperium's endless needs. On the Forge worlds, this cost is so normalized, so utterly integrated into the fabric of existence that it becomes invisible. The tech priests see servitors as blessed beings, their individuality sacrificed in service to the machine god, their former sins purged through their transformation into sacred machinery. The rare, unaugmented humans who work alongside servitors see them as just another type of equipment, no more worthy of consideration than a welding torch or a conveyor belt. And the servitors themselves, locked in their lobotomized existence, lack the capacity to understand what has been done to them. This is the daily reality on the Forge Worlds. This is what it means to be a servitor in the Imperium's industrial heartlands. An existence of endless labor, stripped of rest, comfort, or purpose, beyond the single function programmed into damaged brains. It is a fate that millions currently endure, and millions more will endure tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, for as long as the Imperium continues to exist. The retained consciousness. The theory, as explained by the tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, is clean and straightforward. During the creation of a servitor, the parts of the brain responsible for consciousness, personality, and memory are destroyed or suppressed. What remains is merely a biological computer, capable of processing inputs and executing programmed responses, but possessing no awareness, no sense of self, no suffering. The servitor, they claim, is no more conscious than a cogitator or a server skull. It is a tool that happens to have organic components, nothing more. But the theory does not match the reality. Evidence suggests, horrifyingly, that the process of creating a servitor is not as complete as the Adeptus Mechanicus claims, or perhaps wants to believe. Fragments remain. Consciousness, that most mysterious and resilient aspect of human existence, does not surrender easily to the crude neurosurgery and programming of servitor creation. Deep within the damaged brains of servitors, pieces of the person they once were continue to exist, trapped and distorted, but not entirely destroyed. Physical trauma can cause these fragments to resurface. A servitor who has been damaged in combat, whose brain has been jarred, or whose programming has been disrupted, may suddenly exhibit behaviors that suggest awareness. They might speak words that are not part of their standard vocabulary protocols. They might attempt actions outside their programmed functions. They might simply stop, frozen in place, as something within them struggles against the limitations that have been imposed. The phenomenon is called mindlock, and it is treated as a malfunction rather than what it truly is. A moment of terrible awareness in which the remnant of a human mind realizes its condition. When mindlock occurs, the servitor's fragmentary consciousness tries to assert control over its functions. The result is usually incoherent, a babbling of nonsense, as the damaged brain attempts to process concepts it no longer has the capacity to understand. But sometimes, the words are horrifyingly clear. Sometimes, a servitor in mindlock will simply repeat the same phrase over and over. Help me, help me, help me. These are not random sounds. They are not glitches in programming. They are cries for help from something that, on some level, understands that it is trapped. Imagine, if you can, what that experience must be like. Imagine existing in a state where you can dimly perceive your surroundings but cannot control your actions, where you watch your own body performing tasks, hour after hour, day after day, and you cannot stop it, where you reach for memories of who you were and find only emptiness or fragments so damaged they make no sense, where you scream inside the prison of your skull and no sound emerges because the parts of your brain that control speech have been rewired to serve another purpose. This is what mindlock reveals. Not a malfunction, but a glimpse of the ongoing nightmare that may constitute a servitor's existence. And while mindlock is relatively rare, its existence proves that consciousness, or something like it, persists in at least some servitors, which raises the terrible question: how many servitors retain some level of awareness? Is it only those who malfunction, or do all servitors contain this spark of trapped consciousness, too damaged and suppressed to ever surface, but suffering nonetheless? There are darker theories still, whispered among the more radical elements of the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Inquisition. Some Magi Psychana, those who study the intersection of technology and the warp, claim that while servitors may lack minds in the conventional sense, they still retain souls, that the warp presence, the psychic essence that defines a living human being, remains intact even after the brain has been lobotomized and reprogrammed. These souls, trapped in bodies that no longer respond to their will, imprisoned in brains too damaged to form coherent thoughts, suffer in ways that may be beyond the comprehension of those who retain their full faculties. According to this theory, a servitor's existence is one of constant spiritual agony. The soul, which by its nature seeks expression, consciousness, connection, is bound to a form that denies all of these things. All a servitor should be able to sense, these theories suggest, is the physical through their truncated nerve clusters and the binary logic of the machines grafted where self and will once resided. The soul is aware, but the mind that might process that awareness has been destroyed. It is the ultimate prison, torment without even the mercy of being able to understand the nature of one's torment. The Adeptus Mechanicus officially denies these theories. They are considered tech heresy, a forbidden line of thought that could undermine the entire system of servitor creation. To admit that servitors retain consciousness or souls in torment would be to admit that the Imperium is inflicting a fate potentially worse than death on millions of beings every year. It would raise questions about the morality of the practice, questions that the Imperium cannot afford to entertain, because the entire technological infrastructure depends on servitors to function. But denial does not change reality. Servitors malfunction. They break programming. They speak when they should not speak. They act when they should not act. And sometimes, in the rarest and most disturbing cases, they kill their masters. A servitor that has somehow regained enough awareness to recognize itself as a slave and its owner as a slave master may turn on that owner with whatever weapons or strength it possesses. Such incidents are always attributed to mechanical failure, corrupted programming, anything but the obvious explanation that something inside the servitor remembered what had been done to it and chose violence. The implications are staggering. If consciousness persists, if souls suffer, then the Imperium's solution to the prohibition on artificial intelligence is not merely pragmatic, but actively evil. It transforms the servitor program from a grim necessity into something far darker, a systematic program of spiritual and mental torture on a scale that encompasses millions of victims across thousands of worlds. Consider the servitor standing in the corner of an inquisitor's chamber, holding a data slate, waiting for orders that may not come for hours. Is there something inside that servitor, some tiny fragment of who they were, aware of their situation? Do they remember having hands that could hold things by choice, not by compulsion? Do they understand that they will stand there motionless for as long as required, that they have no agency, no ability to move unless commanded? Consider the gun servitor on the battlefield, its arms replaced with heavy bolters, firing at targets designated by its tech priest handler. Does it feel the recoil? Does it experience fear as enemy fire impacts around it? Does some part of it remember when it had two human arms, when it could choose what to do with them, when its existence was more than being a mobile weapons platform? Consider the servitor working in the toxic refineries of a forge world, laboring in conditions that would kill an unprotected human instantly. Does it suffer? The nerve endings still exist, even if pain processing is altered. The flesh still responds to damage, even if the servitor cannot cry out or flee. Is there awareness of this suffering, or has that mercy at least been removed? We cannot know for certain. The servitors themselves cannot tell us, their capacity for communication destroyed or limited to pre-programmed responses. The tech priests who create them claim ignorance or deny the possibility entirely. The inquisitors and officials who use servitors would rather not know, because knowledge would demand response, and they depend too heavily on servitors to contemplate changing the system. What remains is the terrible possibility the nightmare scenario that suggests itself from every piece of evidence, that servitors do retain some level of consciousness, that they do suffer, that they are aware enough to understand that something terrible has been done to them, but too damaged to do anything about it, that they exist in a state of perpetual imprisonment, their bodies moving through programmed routines, while something inside screams silently, unable to break free, unable even to die. If this is true, then the Servitor represents perhaps the most profound horror in all of Warhammer 40k. Not a monster from the warp, not a xenos species bent on consumption or conquest, but something humanity does to itself. A hell created through deliberate action and maintained through institutional indifference. The transformation of human beings into things, and the possibility that those things remain, on some level, human enough to suffer from what they have become. Cherubim, the baby servitors. Among all the varieties of servitors in the Imperium, none are quite as disturbing as the cherubim. These constructs, designed to resemble the angels of ancient Terran mythology, are found fluttering through the halls of Ecclesiarchy cathedrals, attending high-ranking officials of the Inquisition, and serving the Sisters of Battle in their convents and on the battlefield. They appear as small, corpulent children with cybernetic wings, their faces often carrying serene or innocent expressions. To the citizens of the Imperium, particularly those steeped in the imperial cult's imagery, they are seen as holy beings, symbols of purity and divine favor. But strip away the religious veneer and the carefully maintained aesthetic, and cherubim are revealed as something far more sinister. They are servitors. More specifically, they are servitors built from bodies that are child-sized, whether vat-grown to that specification or created from actual children. The distinction matters, both morally and practically, and the truth of how cherubim are made has been a source of debate and revision within Warhammer 40k lore itself. The official position, as it currently stands, is that most cherubim are vat-grown bioconstructs. They are created from genetic material, artificial organisms that are never truly alive in the conventional sense. Their flesh is synthesized, bloodless and waxy in appearance, engineered to require no food or sleep. They are powered by internal power cells, not by biological metabolism. Their brains, such as they are cybernetically augmented biological cortexes, usually patterned after or harvested from non-sentient creatures like simians, birds, or felines. They are not human, the official sources claim, any more than a server skull is human despite being built around a human skull. But this official position has not always been the case, and darker truths lurk in the older lore and in specific narrative examples. Some sources make it clear that cherubim can be, and sometimes are, created from human children. The process involves taking a child, usually under the age of 6, due to issues with bone density and structural integrity in older children, and converting them into a cherub through the same basic process used for other servitors: lobotomy, embalming, cybernetic augmentation. These variants, sometimes called Nephilim, in distinction from standard cherubim, were originally created from children for practical reasons. A naturally developed human neural system, even a child's, is infinitely more complex than anything the Adeptus Mechanicus can create artificially. Cherubim made from actual children possess better coordination, more sophisticated behavioral programming, and greater capacity for learning and adaptation than their vat-grown counterparts. They are, in the cold calculations of the tech priests, superior products. The procedure is as horrific as you would imagine. The child is lobotomized, their personality and memories destroyed. They are embalmed, their growth halted through chemical treatments to ensure they remain child-sized. Wings, purely decorative and non-functional, are grafted onto their spine, which must be severed and re-spliced to accommodate the weight and structure of the augmetics. Anti-gravity generators are implanted, usually in the chest or back, because the wings cannot actually provide lift. The face might be modified to enhance the angelic appearance, eyes replaced with artificial optics, skin treated to give it that characteristic waxy sheen. What emerges is a flying construct that looks like a bizarre amalgamation of child and machine, a parody of innocence put to service. The uses of cherubim are varied, but generally fall into supporting roles for their masters. They carry data slates, reliquaries, or small weapons. They perform minor maintenance tasks, their small size allowing them to access areas larger servitors cannot. They assist in religious ceremonies, adding to the spectacle and reinforcing the divine imagery of the Ecclesiarchy. For psychically active masters, particularly inquisitors, cherubim can serve as familiars, their minds linked to their masters through psychic bonds that allow the sharing of sensory information and even the augmentation of psychic powers. The cherubim used by the Adepta Sororitas often carry more specialized equipment. They might bear spare ammunition and weapons for the battle sisters, perform emergency repairs on armor in combat, or carry sacred texts and relics into battle. The fact that they are built to resemble innocent children, flying into war zones alongside armored warriors, adds a layer of grotesque symbolism to their function. They represent purity and service, childhood sacrificed to the Imperium's needs, innocence weaponized. Creating a cherub is far more complex and expensive than creating a standard servitor. The required components include a viable skeletal structure, circulatory system, internal organs, and most critically, a sophisticated nervous system capable of the complex mannerisms expected of cherubim. Because of this complexity and cost, cherubim are never mass-produced. Each is essentially custom-made for its master, tailored to their specific needs and preferences. This makes cherubim a status symbol, visible markers of wealth and influence. Only high-ranking officials, successful inquisitors, influential priests, or decorated commanders can afford them. The behavioral programming of cherubim is the most advanced of any servitor type. They display apparent emotions, their faces capable of expressions that suggest happiness, concern, or devotion. They can speak, often in high-pitched, childlike voices, babbling prayers and imperial devotionals. They interact with their environment in ways that seem almost natural, reaching for objects, avoiding obstacles, even displaying what appears to be affection for their masters. This illusion of life and emotion makes them popular among those who can afford them, but it also makes them more disturbing once you understand what they truly are. The Primarch Robuta Guilliman, upon his resurrection in the current era and his return to leading the Imperium, was reportedly disgusted by cherubim. To him, raised in the 30th millennium before such constructs existed, they represent everything that has gone wrong with the Imperium in his absence. The fact that the Imperium now creates flying servitors shaped like children and calls them angels, that it has so thoroughly embraced this grotesque aesthetic and normalized it to the point where citizens see them as holy rather than horrifying, speaks to a level of cultural decay he finds profoundly troubling, and he is right to be troubled. Cherubim embodies several layers of horror. There is the base horror of the servitor concept, the destruction of consciousness and transformation into a tool. There is the added horror of the aesthetic choice, creating something that looks like a child but moves and behaves in ways that are subtly wrong, uncanny valley effects that disturb at a subconscious level. There is the possibility, never entirely dismissed, that some cherubim are made from real children, making them not just symbols of innocence corrupted, but actual innocence destroyed. And there is the casual acceptance of all of this. The way the Imperium has normalized these constructs to the point where they flutter through cathedrals and battlefields without anyone questioning the fundamental wrongness of their existence. When you see a cherub in Warhammer 40k art or fiction, carrying a scroll for an inquisitor or hovering above a sister of battle, try to look past the angelic imagery. See it for what it is, a small servitor, possibly vat-grown, but possibly created from a child, its brain destroyed and replaced with programming. its body modified and augmented, existing now only to serve. See the wings that cannot fly, the power cells that sustain its unliving flesh, the blank expression that might be a mask over a consciousness too damaged to scream. See the cherub as the Imperium's ultimate symbol of innocence sacrificed, and understand that this sacrifice is repeated countless times, considered holy, and never questioned by the faithful who see these constructs as blessings rather than abominations. This is what the Imperium does to children who become servitors. This is how far the supposedly righteous forces of humanity will go to maintain their aesthetic of religious purity while committing acts of profound violation. The cherub is innocence stolen, refashioned into something that serves while pretending to represent what has been destroyed in its creation. Specialized punishment. Servitors. Not all servitors are created for utility. Some are designed specifically as punishment, embodiments of the Imperium's theology of redemptive suffering. These specialized constructs, particularly Arco-Flagellants and Penitent Engines, represent a different philosophy of servitor creation. Where most servitors are intended to be tools, efficient and unremarkable, these punishment servitors are meant to be weapons, and more importantly, they are meant to suffer. Their suffering is the point, the mechanism through which their souls are supposedly purged of sin and made ready for the Emperor's embrace in death. Arco-Flagellants are among the most disturbing of these punishment servitors. They are created from individuals who have been convicted of heresy or other serious crimes against the Imperium, but whose offenses are judged not severe enough to warrant immediate execution. The sentence of arco-flagellation is a compromise. The condemned will die, that much is certain, but their death will be delayed long enough for them to serve the Emperor through violence, and hopefully, through the suffering involved, their souls will be cleansed of their sins. The creation process begins similarly to standard servitor conversion, lobotomy, and cybernetic augmentation. But there are crucial differences. First, the lobotomy is often performed last in the sequence or with minimal anesthesia, ensuring that the condemned feels every moment of their transformation. The theology behind this is explicit. Pain purifies. Suffering burns away sin. Agony brings one closer to the Emperor's divine mercy. The condemned is meant to experience the full horror of their conversion as an act of penance. Both arms are amputated and replaced with weapons, most commonly heavy industrial shears or electro-flails, massive chain weapons that can tear through armor and flesh with equal ease. These weapons are not removable. They are permanently grafted to the body, replacing hands entirely. The Arco-Flagellant will never again be able to hold anything, touch anything, perform any delicate task. Their arms exist only as instruments of destruction. A battery of chemical injectors is grafted directly onto the spine. These injectors contain a cocktail of combat drugs: barrage, friend-zone, slort, and spur, among others. Each drug serves a different purpose. Some enhance strength and speed. Some suppress pain and fear. Some induce aggression and rage. Combined, they transform a human being into a berserker, a creature of pure violent impulse, capable of fighting through injuries that would drop a normal person instantly. The most important component is the pacifier helm, a sealed helmet that contains a crude mind impulse unit wired directly into the cerebrum and spinal cord. While the helm is active, the Arco-Flagellant exists in a state of enforced calm. What little remains of their mind is filled with religious imagery, hymns to the Emperor, icons of the Ecclesiarchy, looping prayers and devotional texts fed directly into their brain. They shuffle when ordered to move, stand when ordered to stop, but otherwise remain completely passive, lost in a drugged haze of religious programming. But the pacifier helm can be deactivated. A trigger word from the Arco-Flagellant's controller is all it takes. When the helm deactivates, everything changes. The drug injectors in the spine activate, pumping their chemical payload into the bloodstream. The religious imagery is replaced with tactical markers. The enforced calm gives way to explosive rage. The Arco-Flagellants' vision is modified so that they can see only entities tagged as enemies. Everyone and everything else becomes invisible to their perception. And then they are unleashed. An active Arco-Flagellant is a force of nature. They sprint toward the nearest enemy with inhuman speed, their augmented legs carrying them forward in bounds that cover dozens of feet. Their weapon arms lash out with terrifying force, the electro-flails or shears cutting through anything in their path. They feel no pain, or rather, the pain is there, but the drugs suppress any response to it. They can be shot, stabbed, burned, and they simply keep coming, keep killing, until their metabolism collapses under the chemical assault, or until they sustain damage so severe that even the combat drugs cannot keep them functioning. The horrible brilliance of the Arco-Flagellants' design is that the pain of their crude bionic grafts actually enhances their frenzy. The weapons grafted to their arms hurt. The injectors in their spine hurt. The modifications to their brain hurt. All of this pain, rather than being suppressed, is channeled into rage. The Arco-Flagellant fights with the desperation of someone in agony who has been told that only through violence can the pain end, which, in a sense, is true. Only death, theirs or their enemies, will silence the screaming of their nerves and the chemical fire in their blood. Arco-Flagellants are used primarily by the Ecclesiarchy and by inquisitors of the Ordo Hereticus. They are deployed in packs, loosed upon the enemies of the Imperium like attack dogs, except these dogs were once human, and somewhere inside them might still remember what they were. After battle, assuming any survive, they are deactivated, the pacifier helms engaged once more, returning them to their passive state. They are then stored in holding cells or transport cages, standing motionless, waiting for the next time they are needed. The theology claims that through this cycle of violence and suffering, the Arco-Flagellant soul is gradually purified. Each battle is an act of penance. Each enemy killed a sin burned away. Eventually, if they survive long enough, the Arco-Flagellant may earn enough redemption to die with a clean soul, acceptable in the Emperor's sight. Some Arco-Flagellants do survive multiple deployments. These individuals, called endurants, are considered to have proven their faith through their endurance. They fight with even greater ferocity than fresh Arco-Flagellants, driven by some dim understanding that their suffering has meaning, that redemption is possible if they can just kill enough of the Emperor's enemies. But most Arco-Flagellants die in their first or second deployment. The combat drugs are not designed for long-term use. The body cannot sustain the chemical assault indefinitely. Hearts give out, organs fail. The brain, already damaged by lobotomy and programming, degrades further under the stress. Even if the Arco-Flagellant is not killed by enemy action, they will die from their own augmentations, their bodies literally consuming themselves in service to the Imperium's wars. The moral calculus here is revealing. The Imperium believes, or at least claims to believe, that this fate is merciful compared to execution, that giving the condemned a chance, however slim, to purge their sins through combat is an act of grace, that the suffering involved is not cruelty, but rather necessary therapy for the soul. This is the logic of a civilization that has become so inured to horror that it can redefine torture as salvation and believe its own propaganda. Penitent engines are related, but even more extreme. These are larger constructs, full mechanical walkers with the condemned individual strapped into or hardwired into a control throne. Unlike Arco-Flagellants who retain mobility on their own legs, penitent engine pilots are permanently mounted in their machines, their nervous systems integrated with the walkers' controls. They charge into battle piloting their mechanical bodies, armed with heavy flamers and close combat weapons, driven by the same theology of redemptive suffering. The cruelty of the penitent engine is that the pilot is aware. Unlike most servitors, the individuals condemned to penitent engines are not fully lobotomized. They retain enough consciousness to understand what is happening to them, to know that they are trapped, to feel every moment of pain as they are driven into battle. The chemical and synaptic inputs pumped into them are carefully calibrated to ensure maximum agony while maintaining combat effectiveness. When they reach close combat range, the inputs are modified to make them see their own faces on every enemy, forcing them to destroy reflections of themselves over and over. This is explicit psychological torture, codified into the design of the weapon system, justified by religious doctrine as necessary for the salvation of the pilot's soul. The penitent engine pilot knows they are being punished. They know they are suffering, and they are told that this suffering is holy, that it brings them closer to the Emperor, that only through death in battle can they find peace. For some, this belief sustains them, gives meaning to their agony. For others, it is one more layer of torture, the knowledge that their torment is considered righteous, that no one will rescue them because everyone believes they deserve this fate. These specialized punishment servitors reveal something important about the Imperium's character. It is not enough to simply execute heretics and criminals. It is not enough to transform them into useful tools. The Imperium demands that they suffer, that their suffering be visible, that it serve as both practical utility and moral theater. The Arco-Flagellant and the Penitent Engine are walking, killing demonstrations of what happens to those who transgress against the Imperium's laws. They are deterrents, warnings, and weapons all combined into one tortured package. And the truly damning thing is that some of the condemned volunteer for these fates. Some heretics, convinced of their sins and desperate for redemption, actually choose arco-flagellation or penitent engines over simple execution. They believe the propaganda. They accept that their suffering will purify them. They willingly submit to procedures that will transform them into instruments of their own destruction, all in the hope that when they finally die, they will be acceptable in the Emperor's sight. This willingness is perhaps the greatest indictment of the Imperium's theology. It has created a system so total, so all-encompassing, that it can convince people that being turned into living weapons and driven to agonizing deaths is preferable to the alternatives. It has made suffering not just acceptable, but desirable, not just punishment, but aspiration. The Imperium does not just create servitors as tools. It creates them as martyrs, as examples, as testaments to the power of faith, to transform even horror into something that can be called holy. Servitors in battle. The battlefield deployment of servitors represents a different aspect of their horror. On the factory floors of Forge Worlds, servitors are tools performing repetitive tasks. In the corridors of ships and institutions, they are servants and attendants. But in combat, servitors become weapons, and their true expendability becomes clear. Battle servitors, gun servitors, and the heavier Kataphron variants are all designed with warfare in mind. Their bodies are armed and armored. Their programming includes combat protocols. They are deployed alongside Imperial forces, particularly the Adeptus Mechanicus's own troops, the Scutarii, but also with the Astra Militarum, when tech priests are attached to guard regiments, and with Space Marine forces where tech marines employ them for support roles. The tactical doctrine surrounding servitor use is brutally simple. They are expendable. A tech priest commanding a unit of gun servitors will position them in the most advantageous firing positions without any consideration for their survival. If holding a choke point requires a servitor to stand in the open and absorb enemy fire while laying down covering fire for more valuable units, that is exactly what the servitor will do. It will stand, it will fire, it will take hits that would force any conscious being to seek cover, and it will continue until it is destroyed or until its ammunition is exhausted. This expendability is not a flaw in the system. It is the entire point. Servitors do not fear death because they lack the capacity for fear. They do not value their own survival because they lack self-preservation instincts beyond the most basic programming. They will charge into enemy fire, advance into kill zones, hold positions that are obviously doomed, all without hesitation or complaint. From a purely tactical perspective, this makes them valuable assets in specific roles where human soldiers might hesitate or break. The Kataphron Battle Servitors exemplify this expendable warfare philosophy. These heavy combat servitors are deployed in formations called clades, groups of dozens or even hundreds of identical units. They rumble forward on their tracks, their heavy weapons firing continuously, advancing into enemy positions with the inevitability of a slow-moving avalanche. When they are destroyed, and they are destroyed in large numbers in any serious engagement, their mangled remains are simply left on the battlefield. They are too damaged to repair and too common to be worth recovering. The metal might be salvaged later if anyone bothers, but the organic components are simply abandoned, left to rot along with all the other casualties of war. This casual attitude towards servitor losses reveals how the Imperium thinks about them. A tech priest will expend a dozen Kataphron servitors with no more thought than a space marine would give to expending a magazine of bolter shells. They are ammunition, consumables, resources to be used and replaced. The fact that each one was built around what was once a human being, that each represents hours of surgery and programming and augmentation, none of this matters in the calculus of war. They are cheaper than tanks, more reliable than conscripts, and absolutely loyal. Use them up, order more, continue the battle. But the expendability of servitors has a weakness, and that weakness is supervision. Servitors, particularly the simpler combat varieties, function poorly without active direction from a tech priest or tech marine. Their programming is sufficient for basic tasks: fire at designated targets, advance when ordered, hold position when told to hold, but it lacks the flexibility to adapt to changing battlefield conditions. If left unsupervised, combat servitors will often simply freeze up, their limited decision-making capacity overwhelmed by situations outside their programmed parameters. This phenomenon, also called mindlock in the military context, renders servitors nearly useless without handlers. A gun servitor without a tech priest nearby might continue firing at targets that are no longer relevant, while ignoring more pressing threats. A combat servitor might advance past strategic objectives because its programming said to advance and nothing told it to stop. Servitors can become stuck in loops, repeating actions that are no longer appropriate because they lack the cognitive capacity to recognize that the situation has changed. This dependency is why servitors are almost always deployed under direct supervision. A tech priest or tech marine will lead a unit of servitors using their own neural links and command protocols to provide constant updates and direction. The servitors essentially become extensions of the commander's will, their actions guided by constant streams of binary commands and targeting data. When this system works, it is highly effective. The commander provides the intelligence and adaptability, while the servitors provide the firepower and durability. But if the commander is killed, or the neural link is disrupted, the servitors become nearly worthless, standing around in confusion or continuing to follow the last orders they received, regardless of whether those orders still make sense. This has led to tactics specifically designed to target tech priests and tech marines in combat. Enemy forces have learned that killing the commander of a servitor unit effectively neutralizes the entire unit, at least temporarily. Focus fire on the robed figure, surrounded by armed servitors, and you can render an entire formation combat ineffective without having to destroy the servitors themselves. There is also the question of what happens when servitors malfunction in combat. Physical trauma, the kind that is common on battlefields, can disrupt servitor programming and neural augmentations. A servitor that takes a head wound might suddenly find its behavioral inhibitors damaged. A servitor whose power cells are disrupted might have its pacifier systems fail. In these cases, unpredictable behavior can result. the servitor might freeze. It might attack its own allies, unable to distinguish friend from foe. Or, in the rarest and most disturbing cases, it might remember. There are scattered reports, always dismissed as superstition or exaggeration, of servitors who have exhibited awareness in the chaos of battle. A servitor who suddenly drops its weapon and flees, something no servitor should ever do. A servitor who speaks in a human voice, not the mechanical drone they are programmed to use, begging for help or crying out in recognition of what has been done to it. A servitor who deliberately targets its tech priest handler, not as a malfunction, but as an act of what can only be described as revenge. These incidents are always explained away: equipment failure, programming corruption, enemy interference. But the fact that they happen at all suggests that combat, with its chaos and violence and trauma, can sometimes break through the barriers that keep servitors locked in their programmed stupor. A heavy impact to the head, a power surge through augmetic systems, the stress of sustained combat. Something in these experiences can apparently trigger memories or awareness that was supposed to be permanently suppressed. The Imperium's response to such malfunctions is straightforward: destroy the Servitor and replace it. If the Servitor cannot be immediately destroyed, deactivate it and recycle the components. Under no circumstances should anyone investigate why the malfunction occurred or what it might mean. To question Servitor reliability is to question the entire system, and the system is too important to the Imperium's functioning to permit such questions. So Servitors continue to be deployed in their millions, continue to die in their millions, continue to be replaced and redeployed in an endless cycle. They are the Imperium's ultimate expendable resource. Soldiers who require no morale, workers who require no rest, weapons that think just enough to aim but not enough to question. In the grim calculus of imperial warfare, they are perfect. And the fact that each one represents a human being transformed into a tool, potentially suffering in ways we cannot fully comprehend, is simply not a factor in that calculus. Malfunction and mindlock. We have touched on the concept of mindlock and malfunction several times, but it deserves deeper examination because it represents one of the few windows we have into what might be the internal experience of a servitor. When a servitor malfunctions, when it enters mindlock, when it behaves in ways outside its programming, we catch glimpses of something that should not exist. Consciousness, awareness, suffering. The official explanation for mindlock is mechanical. The servitor's brain, already damaged during creation, suffers further degradation over time or due to trauma. The neural pathways that carry commands become corrupted. The programming, never perfect to begin with, develops errors that accumulate until the servitor can no longer function reliably. The fragmented consciousness that remains tries to assert control over functions it no longer understands, resulting in confused and inappropriate behavior. But this explanation, while technically accurate, misses the deeper horror. What does it mean for a fragmented consciousness to try to assert control? What does the servitor experience in those moments of mindlock? Are we talking about mere biological processes misfiring? Or is there some level of awareness, some spark of the person they once were, struggling against the machine that has consumed them? The clearest evidence comes from servitors who speak during mindlock. Their words are often repetitive, the same phrases over and over, suggesting limited capacity for language or thought. But the words themselves are revealing. Help me. This is not a phrase that should exist in a servitor's vocabulary, unless it was specifically programmed for some utility purpose. It is not a tactical report or a status update. It is a plea, a cry for assistance from something that recognizes it needs help. Other servitors have been recorded saying variations on this theme. Wrong. Stop. Please. Remember. Each of these words suggests some level of awareness, however limited, however damaged. The servitor knows, on some level, that something is wrong with their situation. They want it to stop. They are asking, with whatever limited capacity remains to them, for someone to intervene. And in the case of remember, they are perhaps grasping at fragments of memory, pieces of their former life that surface briefly before being lost again to the damaged pathways of their brain. Physical trauma during combat or accidents can trigger these episodes. A blow to the head that disrupts augmetic implants, a power surge that overloads neural programming, exposure to psychic phenomena that the servitor's damaged mind cannot process. In these moments, the careful balance that keeps the servitor functioning as intended is disrupted, and what remains beneath, if anything remains, can briefly surface. The most disturbing cases involve servitors who regain enough awareness to recognize their situation and act on that recognition. There are documented instances of servitors killing their masters. These are always officially explained as programming failures or hostile subversion, but the circumstances often suggest something more deliberate. A servitor who has been abused by its master suddenly turning on them. A servitor who has been worked to the point of mechanical failure attacking the tech priest who refused to authorize repairs. A servitor achieving enough temporary awareness to understand that it is enslaved and choosing violence against its enslaver. These incidents are exceptionally rare. The lobotomy and programming are usually effective enough to prevent this level of awareness, but the fact that they happen at all proves that the process is not perfect, that consciousness or something like it can persist and, under the right circumstances, reassert itself. Each such incident is a crack in the official narrative that servitors are merely biological machines with no awareness of their condition. Then there are the servitors who simply stop. They do not enter a violent frenzy or cry out for help. They just stop moving, stop responding to commands, stop functioning entirely. When examined, there is often nothing mechanically wrong with them. The augmetics are functional, the programming is intact, the power systems are operating normally. Something else has failed, something that cannot be measured by the tech priest's instruments. Perhaps the will to continue, if such a thing can exist in a being whose will was supposedly destroyed. Perhaps the final degradation of whatever consciousness remained, the spark finally guttering out after years or decades of torment. The Adeptus Mechanicus has protocols for dealing with all of these failure modes. Servitors who malfunction are quarantined and examined, but not to understand their internal experience. The examination is purely mechanical, looking for technical faults that can be corrected in future production. Servitors who cannot be repaired are decommissioned, which is a euphemism for being taken apart for salvage. The useful components are recovered, the rest is discarded. The entire process is logged and documented with the same dispassionate efficiency as any other maintenance procedure. What is never examined, never even acknowledged as worth examining, is the possibility that these malfunctions represent something more than mechanical failure, that they might be evidence of ongoing consciousness, of suffering so profound that it occasionally breaks through the barriers designed to contain it. To acknowledge this would be to acknowledge the moral horror of the Servitor program, and the Imperium cannot afford such acknowledgement. The system is too important, too deeply integrated into every aspect of Imperial life, to be questioned based on the possibility that the tools might still be people. So the malfunctions continue. Servitors enter mindlock and babble phrases that suggest awareness. Servitors attack their masters in what might be desperate attempts at freedom or revenge. Servitors simply stop, their minds or souls or whatever spark animated them finally failing under the weight of their existence. And the Imperium responds to each incident the same way. Repair if possible, replace if not, and never, ever question whether the servitor's unexpected behavior might be trying to tell us something about what it means to exist in such a state. The tragedy is compounded by the fact that even when servitors achieve these brief moments of awareness, there is nothing they can do about it. They cannot escape. They cannot change their situation. They cannot even effectively communicate what they are experiencing. The lobotomy and augmentation have taken away too much. They can cry out for help, but the help will not come, because to the Imperium, they are not beings that can suffer, just machines that have malfunctioned. They can attack, but they will be destroyed for their rebellion, and their destruction will be considered maintenance, not murder. They can stop, but they will simply be replaced, their brief moment of consciousness ending in recycling and disposal. This is perhaps the deepest horror of the Servitor. Not just that they are created from human beings, not just that they might retain consciousness and suffer, but that even when that consciousness manages to surface, to make itself known, it is met with indifference or violence. The servitor in mindlock crying, "Help me," is not helped. It is examined for mechanical faults and either repaired or destroyed. The servitor who attacks its master is not seen as a person finally rebelling against their imprisonment. It is seen as dangerous equipment that must be eliminated. The Imperium has created a system so complete that even direct evidence of suffering is interpreted through a framework that denies the possibility of that suffering. The greater horror. Implications. Having examined the servitor from every angle, from creation to daily existence to specialized variants to deployment and malfunction, we must now step back and consider what this all means. What does the existence of the Servitor tell us about the Imperium of man? What does it reveal about humanity in the 41st millennium? And how does this horror compare to the other horrors of the Warhammer 40k universe? The Servitor is not an accident of history or an unfortunate necessity forced upon the Imperium by external circumstances. It is a choice, made deliberately, maintained systemically, and defended ideologically. The ban on artificial intelligence, which is the justification for servitors, is understandable given the catastrophes of the dark age of technology. The fear of machine rebellion is not paranoid fantasy. It is based on historical events that nearly destroyed humanity. But the response to that fear, the decision to use lobotomized humans as biological computers, represents a choice to prioritize certain values over others. The Imperium chose efficiency over dignity. It chose productivity over personhood. It chose the immediate utility of having reliable workers and soldiers over the moral weight of what it was doing to obtain those workers and soldiers. This was not inevitable. Other civilizations in the Warhammer 40k universe have found different solutions. The Tau use actual artificial intelligence, accepting the risks in exchange for the capabilities. The Necrons use fully mechanical bodies that do not require organic components. Even within the Imperium, there are alternatives: human workers, servo-skulls made from the already dead, simpler automated systems that do not require human brains to function. But the Imperium chose servitors, and it chose them because they work. They are effective, reliable, and terrifyingly efficient. A servitor can outwork dozens of humans without rest or complaint. Servitor-based automation does not lead to unemployment protests or labor unrest, because the servitors themselves cannot protest, and everyone else has been conditioned to see them as machinery, rather than as people. The system is self-reinforcing. The more the Imperium relies on servitors, the more normal they become, the less anyone questions their use, and the easier it becomes to create more of them. This normalization is perhaps the most damning aspect of the Servitor program. On Mars, on the Forge Worlds, in the corridors of ships and institutions throughout the Imperium, servitors are simply part of the landscape. Children grow up seeing them everywhere, learning from birth that these things are tools, not people, that they exist to serve, that their existence is holy and blessed by the machine god. The tech priests who create servitors are not seen as monsters, but as artisans, craftsmen whose skills allow them to transform useless criminals and waste material into valuable assets. The officials who use servitors do not see themselves as slave masters, but as administrators making efficient use of available resources. The entire civilization has constructed an elaborate system of justifications and rationalizations that allow people to sleep at night, despite being surrounded by and dependent upon beings that were once human and that might still suffer. The cult Mechanicus provides religious justification, claiming that servitors are blessed, their consciousness joined with the machine god, their former sins purged through their transformation. The imperial cult adds its own layer, teaching that those who become servitors are serving the emperor, that their sacrifice, even if unwilling, has meaning and purpose. The practical administrators simply point to the numbers. Servitors work, servitors are reliable, servitors are necessary, and therefore servitors are good. But strip away all the justifications and look at what actually happens. The Imperium takes human beings, usually people who have committed crimes or who are simply unwanted or inconvenient, and it destroys their personhood. It damages their brains, reprograms what remains, augments their bodies with machinery, and puts them to work. It does this on an industrial scale, millions of conversions every year, creating a permanent underclass of beings who exist at a level below slavery, because at least slaves are recognized as people. And it does all of this while claiming to be defending humanity, preserving human civilization, serving the emperor of mankind. The contradiction is staggering. The Imperium claims to value human life, to be the last bastion of humanity in a galaxy full of Xenos threats and chaos corruption. But it treats human beings as raw materials, resources to be processed and consumed. The Servitor is the purest expression of this contradiction, the point where the Imperium's rhetoric about human dignity crashes against the reality of how it actually treats the humans under its control. And this brings us to a deeply uncomfortable truth. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there might not be any good guys, but the Imperium's treatment of its own people makes it particularly difficult to root for. The Chaos Forces are at least honest about what they are. They serve dark gods who demand corruption and destruction. They offer power at the cost of one's soul. They make no pretense of being righteous. The various Xenos races have their own alien logic and purposes, incomprehensible or hostile to humanity, but at least comprehensible in their own terms. But the Imperium takes human beings and transforms them into living tools while claiming to be the defenders of humanity. The hypocrisy is almost more disturbing than the act itself. The Servitor also serves as a broader metaphor for the Imperium's character. Every imperial citizen is, in a sense, a servitor. They are assigned a function from birth. They perform that function without question or deviation. Their individuality is suppressed in favor of their utility. They are told that their suffering serves the emperor, that their sacrifice has meaning, that questioning the system is heresy. The only difference between a factory worker in a hive city and a servitor is the degree of lobotomy, the amount of agency that has been removed. The servitor is simply the logical endpoint of the Imperium's philosophy, a being that exists solely to serve, with no thoughts or desires that might interfere with that service. This is the greater horror that the Servitor represents. It is not just a disturbing element of the setting, a piece of grim-dark window dressing to establish how terrible the future is. It is a mirror that reflects the Imperium's true nature. The Imperium is a civilization that has become so committed to its own survival that it has abandoned almost everything that made humanity worth preserving in the first place. It is a machine that grinds up human beings and spits out tools, and it has been doing this for so long that it no longer even sees what it has become. The Servitor is the Imperium, lobotomized, augmented, programmed for a single purpose, unable to question or resist, existing only to serve regardless of the cost. And just like the Servitor, the Imperium might have something trapped inside it, some remnant of what humanity once was, occasionally surfacing in moments of clarity before being suppressed again by the weight of tradition and necessity and fear. The difference is that servitors can be pitied. The Imperium, which creates servitors by choice and in full awareness of what it is doing, cannot. This is what the Servitor teaches us about the Imperium of man. It is a civilization that has chosen this horror, embraced it, normalized it, made it holy. And in doing so, it has revealed that the greatest threat to humanity in Warhammer 40k might not be chaos or Xenos or any external force. It might be humanity itself, or rather, what humanity has become in its desperation to survive. The Servitor is the proof, walking evidence of how far the Imperium will go, how much of what makes us human it is willing to sacrifice, all in the name of preserving a civilization that might no longer deserve preservation. Conclusion. The Servitor stands as one of the darkest creations in the Warhammer 40k universe, and given the competition, that is a profound statement. It is a being that exists at the intersection of human and machine, consciousness and programming, servitude and slavery. It is created through the deliberate destruction of personhood, maintained through systems that deny its suffering, and used with a callousness that reveals the true character of the Imperium it serves. We have explored every aspect of the Servitor's existence. We have seen how they are created, the brutal process of lobotomy and augmentation that transforms humans into tools. We have examined the different varieties, from basic labor servitors to specialized combat variants to the disturbing cherubim. We have looked at their daily existence on Forge worlds and in service throughout the Imperium. We have confronted the evidence that consciousness might persist despite the Imperium's best efforts to destroy it, trapped and suffering in ways we can barely imagine. We have witnessed their expendability in combat and the horror of what happens when they malfunction and momentarily regain awareness. And we have considered the broader implications, what the Servitor tells us about the Imperium and about humanity itself in the grim darkness of the far future. The Servitor is horror on multiple levels. There is the body horror of the physical transformation, flesh cut away and replaced with machinery. There is the psychological horror of consciousness, potentially trapped in a body it cannot control, forced to witness its own actions without any ability to intervene. There is the existential horror of personhood destroyed, of beings that were once individuals reduced to functions and serial numbers. There is the moral horror of a civilization that does this systematically on an industrial scale and considers it not just acceptable but holy. And there is the philosophical horror of what this reveals about the value the Imperium places on human life, which is to say, none at all beyond utility. The next time you encounter a servitor in Warhammer 40k fiction or art, pause for a moment. Look past the cybernetic enhancements and the programmed behavior. Try to imagine what might exist inside that damaged brain. Is there consciousness? Is there memory? Is there suffering? We cannot know for certain, and perhaps that uncertainty is its own form of horror. But the possibility, the evidence that sometimes suggests the answer is yes, should give us pause. The Servitor is what happens when humanity becomes so focused on survival that it loses sight of what it is trying to survive as. It is what happens when efficiency trumps ethics, when utility is valued over dignity, when the ends are allowed to justify any means, no matter how terrible. It is the Imperium's compromise with its fear of artificial intelligence, a compromise that might be worse than what it was meant to prevent. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But there is also this, the Servitor, standing in every corner, toiling in every factory, fighting in every battle, suffering perhaps in ways we cannot comprehend, all in service to an Imperium that has forgotten what it means to be human. That is the truly horrifying life of a Servitor in Warhammer 40k. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the darker aspects of the Warhammer 40k universe, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. There is so much more to explore in the grim darkness of the far future, and we are just getting started. Thank you for watching, and remember, in a galaxy where there are no good guys, understanding the horror is the first step toward appreciating just how dark things truly are.